So tonight, I have the privilege to have with me Mr. Mark Lawton. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening.
Mark Lawton is running for mayor in Brockton. And we are fortunate to have him, and we thank you for taking your time to
Thank you.
talk with us. So, Mark, I believe that, many people who are watching now, they would like to know, like, who is Mark and what is your plan? So, how about you tell, the audience about
Well, let me
who is Mark?
tell you in a couple minutes who I am. I was born in Brockton to Jim and Jean Lawton. They came from the east side of the city. If you're from Brockton, you know about the east side, west side, Campello, Montello. But I was born to parents who came from the east side, Summer Street, Galen Street. We lived on 25 Carey Street. I was actually born on Turner Street.
Okay.
Moved back to the east side where my parents came from. My parents had 5 boys. I'm the oldest of the 5. My father ran for the city council, was the youngest member ever elected to the Brockton City Council until Jack Lally was elected 4 years ago. My father then ran for a seat in the House of Representatives and served for 10 years. He ran for Attorney General in '62, the same year that a young Ted Kennedy ran for the U.S. Senate.
Okay.
They were nominated out in the Springfield Democratic Convention. My father was then appointed to a judgeship in 1964. I attended Brockton Public Schools. I married a Brockton woman, Patricia O'Leary, the daughter of a Brockton police patrolman, Joseph Francis Snub O'Leary. I ran for a seat in the House of Representatives, served Brockton for 10 years, 5 terms in the House of Representatives. The Governor Edward King, appointed me to the Massachusetts Trial Court. I was the youngest member ever appointed to the Massachusetts Trial Court. I married Baker, Stevie Bernard, Reverend Mike Walker, and others, and I founded the Brockton Boys and Girls Club. We had our first meeting at the Messiah Baptist Church on Legion Parkway. It was the first meeting we had that resulted in the opening of the doors of the Boys and Girls Club in December of 1990. I sat mostly in Boston, but sometimes in Brockton. As a result of sitting in Brockton, and I used to work out at the Y every night, I'd wind up taking showers with people I was holding on bail.
Okay.
I was holding on bail, so my family and I, we moved to Bridgewater, 7 miles away, just so I wouldn't run into those types of situations. In 2013,
Okay.
Patty and I ran Bill Carpenter's campaign for mayor. And obviously Bill won in a landslide. He won by 55 votes.
Wow.
And then we ran Billy Carpenter's campaign again in 2015. We ran his campaign again in 2017. And then this year in 2019, we were running Billy's campaign again, along with people like Joseph Francois and others. And as we know, Billy died on July 3rd,
Yeah.
which segues, if you will, into the question, well, why are you running? I'm running, as I told the Brockton Enterprise when they asked me when I decided to run. I decided to run 8 days after Billy died.
Okay.
And I never thought that I would ever run for political office ever again.
And is it, if you don't, if you allow me to cut you off, it's just because Bill died, and this is what triggered you? This is a tip point that pushing you to run? Or?
Correct. I never would have run against Bill Carpenter.
Okay.
I never would have run for office ever again. But the Enterprise, as I was starting to say, asked me, why are you running? And I used 5 words, because my best friend died.
Okay.
And I feel, as I would if you and I were friendly, I have a great sense of loyalty to family and to friends.
Yeah.
And I felt as though we couldn't find anyone to succeed Billy other than his haters and detractors and critics.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided 3 hours after the funeral service at Brockton High, in talking to my wife, I thought that it was something that I should do because I owed it to Bill to
Okay.
finish what Bill started. And so I decided that Friday,
Mm-hmm.
on Sunday, because again, we've been sleeping in Bridgewater for several years, right?
Okay.
Even though I work in Brockton every day,
Okay,
I
but
left the trial court
mm-hmm.
7.5 years ago. So I have been in Brockton every day, practicing law at 157 Belmont Street, 7 days a week, by the
Okay.
way. My wife was elected president of the Brockton Charity Guild, which raises money. We raise money to feed the poor
Okay.
in Brockton. Patty's on the board at the Brockton Hospital. And again, I practiced law there 7 days, and we were running Billy's campaigns, 13, 15, 17, and 19.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in Brockton 7 days a week anyway.
Okay.
In 15, 16, 17 hours a day. I was just sleeping in Bridgewater. But if I was going to run for mayor,
Mm-hmm.
to finish the job that Bill started,
Okay.
I had to actually sleep in Bridgewater. So I registered, I signed a lease in Brockton the Sunday after I decided to run.
Mm-hmm.
The next day I registered to vote in Brockton, which you can do,
Mm-hmm.
which anybody can do, by the way.
Okay.
Anyone can do.
That's pretty good.
All you do, you register to vote. And if you're a registered voter, you can take out papers and run for city councilor.
Okay.
You can run for school committee.
Mm-hmm.
You can run for state representative. You can run for the state senate. You can run for mayor.
So it's something that allowed in
That's
Brockton.
allowed, no, it's allowed anywhere.
Anywhere. Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I did what anybody has a right to
To
do.
do. Okay.
I registered to vote, and I took out papers to run for mayor to finish the job that Bill started.
And when you mention, without cutting you off, when you mention about continue with the vision of
Yeah.
Bill, like what Bill has started,
Yeah.
and now how under your leadership. So, for instance, as like the issue people facing in Brockton, how under your leadership you will improve, let's say, the lives of people there, or either the education system
Right.
or the
I'll
other.
try to hit
yeah.
all of that
Mhm.
with the time we have left. I've used this metaphor several times. Now, the camera can't pick up that door that is behind you,
Mhm.
but I'm facing the door. You and I walked in tonight with Joseph Francois. We walked in through that door and sat here,
Yes.
right? What Billy thought himself as, and what I see myself as,
Mhm.
is a high-paid doorman.
Okay.
To open that door for people and then close it and then open it, keep it unlocked so people can walk through it. For many years, that door of opportunity was closed. It was closed. And Billy Carpenter opened up that door for people. It's a door of opportunity. When the door is closed, it's not a door of opportunity. When it's opened, it has a big O on it, opportunity.
Mhm.
And Bill Carpenter, when he talked to me about running, it would have been January of 2013. He won that election in November of 2013. He was sworn into his first term in January of 2014.
Mhm.
But when Bill came to see me, and as you know, I just left the trial court. I had just given up my judgeship. I left early and decided to go back into the practice of law in Brockton. Bill said he wanted to run for mayor. And I said, that's fine if you want to run, but how are you going to change the face of the city?
Okay.
You tell me how you're going to change the face of the city.
Mhm.
Will you open up that door for people? And he said, yes. And I said, then I'm on board. Since that time,
Mhm.
since he was sworn in January 2014, 46% of all hires in the city, outside of police and fire, because that's wedded with the civil service system, as you know,
Mhm.
46% of all hires have been people of color.
Okay.
56% of people appointed to boards and commissions. And by boards and commissions, I mean License Commission, Conservation Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, the ZBA.
Okay.
You name the commission, 56% of all appointments made since January 14 have been to people of color. I asked Billy, a young kid wanted to be, I'll mention his name, Wilson Cabral. He wanted to get into the academy.
Okay.
And Bill was only, I probably shouldn't even say this, but Bill was they were gonna put 7 new kids into the police academy. And I said, Bill, please appoint this kid. He's wonderful. And he's from Fogo, but he's a wonderful kid, and he's gonna make a great police officer. And Bill said, based on your representation, on behalf of Wilson Cabral, let me see if we can reach him. And he had to reach a few people down to get Wilson, but now he's going into the academy.
Okay.
And the 2 or 3 people he had to reach through to get him are people of color. So Billy understood, in order to change the city, you've got to do it from the outside in and from the inside out.
Okay.
And being a doorman, opening that door of opportunity, in my opinion, is the best way to do it.
Okay.
And the most credible way of showing that you're going to represent every community,
Okay.
whether white or black, whether Irish or Haitian, whether Swedish or French. It doesn't make any difference. Everybody has a place at the table. Everyone. There's a seat for everyone.
Okay.
And it will be reflective. The city of Brockton will be reflective of the people who reside there.
For instance, under your leadership, let's say 100 days under your leadership, what people in Brockton should expect? Like, you're going to tackle, like, in terms of prioritize
Well,
the
let me
issue?
say this.
Yeah.
Bill died on July 3rd.
Okay.
Within 48 hours by July, because the holiday was the 4th, by the 5th and the 6th, private investors were already making inquiry into the city of Brockton, talking to people like the new CFO, Troy Clarkson, and other people, inquiring about the stability of the city.
Okay.
Is the city going to stay on the same track? Are we going to continue to move forward? Now, I think you know that this year alone, 2019, and I may be off a little, but do you know that close to $213 million of building applications have been applied for building in the city of Brockton? It's an amazing figure. Never been done before. Do you know that the last 2 years under Billy Carpenter, Brockton has experienced its largest period of economic expansion in terms of values going up,
Okay.
which means if property, just given the economic expansion, the price of your house went up. So in other words, you've got more equity if you decide to sell a house. Now granted, it also means if you want to move from Randolph, who we are now, to Brockton, you're going to be paying a little bit more. But that's a good thing.
Okay.
Because property and value in Brockton was always undervalued. And Billy, given the economic expansion that he's responsible for, because he was pro-business, and he attracted state dollars from the governor and from the lieutenant governor, who have made about 11 trips to the city of Brockton to announce grants
Okay.
to the city, including that $23.5 million state building at the end of Belmont Street that runs perpendicular into Main Street, the old Ganley building. It's going to be a $23.5 million, $24 million state office building. You know that the state gave us $10 million for the new parking garage,
Okay.
and that's the second parking garage we have. The first one is on the corner of Crescent Street and Main Street. When I was in the House of Representatives, believe it or not, I was able to get a waiver, a federal waiver that we needed to get that parking garage built. So this is the second garage, but without it, the economic expansion around that parking garage that's now going up wouldn't be possible, because private investors would not have invested. So you've got a little catalyst that causes economic expansion. Then you have economic expansion, you get buildings, market rate housing, market rate, and then you've got the restaurants that follow.
Okay.
And then people follow. And then with people come more expansion. It's a tiger chasing its tail. It's a beautiful thing to watch it happen. And then that economic expansion radiates like the spokes in a bicycle. They radiate outwards
Okay.
to the neighborhoods. It allows us greater opportunity to have the revenue to rebuild playgrounds, to repave streets,
Okay.
to hire more firefighters, to hire more police officers, so we're safer. And now I want to get to this point. The number one issue when Bill Carpenter ran in 2013, the number one issue was crime.
Okay.
The most violent city, granted, is kind of a geographical anomaly, the city of Chelsea. It's only 1 square mile. 1 square mile. City of Chelsea was just ahead of Brockton as, in terms of statistically, the most violent city in the East Coast. Not New England
Okay.
and not Massachusetts, the East Coast. Statistically, that was so, using FBI statistics. We were right behind Chelsea. If you take Chelsea out of the equation, sadly, Brockton statistically was the most violent city in the East.
Okay.
And it was tough to admit.
And-
And we were.
And if you can just tell me like how, for instance, under your leadership, how you're gonna tackle that?
Well, but I have to answer that by telling you this. When Billy was named, when he was appointed when he was elected
Yeah.
mayor, his first chief that he appointed was Bob Hayden, the former chief of police in Lawrence, the deputy superintendent of police in Boston, the undersecretary of public safety under my friend Paul Salucci, who was governor,
Okay.
and he hired Bob. Bob grew up in Dorchester, lived down in Hingham. He hired Bob. Bob was the finest appointment, mayoral appointment anybody could have made. And what Bob did, it wasn't really that singularly different, but yet it was, because what he did is he took the sheriff and county law enforcement officials, along with local, the police department, the DA, state officials, the state police, and then every single federal agency. And he took them and he cobbled them together.
Okay.
He cobbled them together and made them the most dynamic crime-fighting model that anybody could ever see. And crime dropped dramatically. He took the bike patrols, the motorcycle police, put them back out on the street for the first time in over 33 years. He executed search warrants. I was a judge, as you know,
Yeah,
for
I know.
over 20 years. So I was pretty familiar with search warrants and signing them and finding probable cause and so on and so forth. They not only doubled, they tripled, and they quadrupled the number of search warrants that they executed, arresting the bad guys. They first made a list of the most violent, most dangerous people in the city, and they set out to get them, and they did. Violent crime and nonviolent crime came down. When I say nonviolent crime, I mean property crimes, like breaking and entering, malicious damage of property, that type of thing, property crimes.
Yeah.
But violent crime and nonviolent crime came down dramatically. And since World War II, the number one reason why people move out of a city, a town, is crime.
Correct. Okay.
Post-World War II, the number one reason why people and families with children move into a community is because of crime. The perception that it's controlled and that it's going down. So we took that so-called exodus of people and we reversed it. And now the middle class, they're coming back in, they're buying homes, they're painting their gutters, they're paying property taxes, they're sending kids to public schools, which gets to the public school thing. And how do we improve the public school system? Well, we improve it in a couple different ways. We improve it by attracting the middle class back into the city, number one.
Okay.
Number two is showing support for the public school system. And you do that by getting those families back into the city. And number three, you do what Billy Carpenter did.
Okay.
And what you do is, when you see an injustice, it's like that door being closed. It's an injustice. You open it, and people have access, right? That's justice. When we know that as a gateway city, like Fall River, New Bedford, Holyoke, Boston, Brockton, all the gateway cities, right? The large industrial cities, Lawrence, Lowell, in the large cities, you'll find that the state reimbursement for those children in gateway cities is far less than what it should be. So there was an issue raging for the last 7 or 8 years called justice in education. How can the gateway cities get justice?
Okay.
Why do we have, coming from a poorer community, or a less rich community, is it fair that public school education is paid for via the property tax? And in Brockton, as opposed to Lincoln, Mass, or Wayland, or Concord, or Duxbury, or Hingham, or Cohasset, why is it that the New Bedfords and Brocktons have to spend less per child to educate their children than Cohasset and Duxbury and Concord and Carlisle and Sudbury? Why?
Okay.
And it's not rigged.
Why is that?
As a gateway city, my grandparents came from Ireland. Right? And they were shoe workers. Same with my wife's grandparents. They were all shoe workers. But as a gateway city that takes, it was a great gateway city when my parents grew up. Pardon me, it was an immigrant community. And it is today. But that doesn't mean that they're not entitled to the same quality of education that you get in richer communities. So Billy Carpenter and other mayors joined force in a cause of action against the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, suing the Commonwealth for more money to support quality education in the public schools and gateway communities.
As you
And
mentioned,
already, go ahead.
as you
I didn't
mentioned,
interrupt you.
sorry about that. As you mentioned about more money, because we had other candidates who came here, and one of the criticism about the the education system in Brockton, they mentioned that there is more money. There is money, but it's just how the money allocated, and they mentioned the issue of the number of students per classroom, and teachers
true.
get fired and
That's
stuff like
exactly
that.
true.
It's like the money has been spent more in administrative versus
Well, I
to
mean,
reach out to
but that only works so far because you can only cut so much in administration. By the way, I'm not suggesting that we don't or we do.
Okay.
Right? Because what you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. We're not talking about cutting out an assistant to an assistant administrator.
Okay.
We're talking about millions of dollars here. We're not talking about 4 or 5 administrators. We're talking about millions of dollars that Brockton is entitled to. We're talking about reducing class size,
Okay.
not only in the 1st grade, but in the 11th grade, in the 12th grade, and in the 7th grade. We're talking about making sure we keep junior high sports. And we're making sure, as I was just saying, when you asked that last question, we have to come up with a formula. The House and Senate did this year.
Okay.
I think it was $293 additional dollars, knowing that this equity in education legislation would be filed, and they would have to deal with it. So they looked at it, and the Speaker of the House and Senate President made the statement that we look at equity in education as a 5-year plan, and we have to come up with $1 billion, $1.2 billion probably, to put public schools in gateway cities, put them in a position where they should have been 5 to 10 years ago. So they appropriated and sent to the governor, and the governor signed the bill, signed the budget into law, and I believe it was $293 million additional dollars on top of what they had already approved for public school education. They look at that and they've promised that that's going to be the first year down payment
Okay.
toward education in gateway cities. That's the good news. The bad news is they never addressed how that formula would be adjusted so the gateway cities get that money. They never
Okay.
did that. So when is that going to be done? I'm assuming it's going to be done in the fall. Or sometime soon, right? Because cities like Brockton, New Bedford, and Fall River, they want that money.
Okay.
And they particularly need it before the end of this fiscal year so that they can plan on what they're going to be doing in the following fiscal year. So we're talking about a lot of money. And Bill Carpenter addressed that issue appropriately by forcing the House and Senate, along with our legislative delegation, by the way, and the legislative delegations from each of from each of the sanctuaries, the gateway cities like Brockton. Billy Carpenter did the right thing, and the students in Brockton will be the main beneficiaries of that.
Okay.
Brockton has always been known, I want to say this, that Brockton has always been known as a city of great public school education. But there are some things that have to be worked out, and I think you're aware of it, as am I. The dropout rate was too high. In the last several years, that has come down,
Okay.
the dropout rate.
Yeah.
And also, the rate of dismissals for minority kids has been way too high. Way too high.
Okay.
Kids who are suspended, been way too high. And that's an issue that has to be addressed. And that's a real systemic problem. And I'm not chairman of the school committee yet. I will by virtue of being elected if I am elected. I may
Okay.
not get elected,
Okay.
but there's also a chance that I may.
Yeah.
If I do, I want to make sure that that issue is addressed, because it must be addressed. Because if a kid is suspended for whatever reason, then that's a burden that he has to carry for the rest of his life.
Yeah, definitely. Let me just remind the audience who's listening, you are listening to the Multicultural Television Network, and it's in the series of Dialogue with the Candidates. One more time, we have with us Mr. Mark Lawton, and he's been talking about his plan and who he is and agenda and issues in Brockton. So we know there are like a total of 7 candidates running for mayor in Brockton. So what makes you different? Besides
What
of
makes
the
me different?
besides of the experience you have, we know you
I
were
think my connection to Brockton.
okay.
Nobody has the history, family history and individual history of connectedness to Brockton. When I was on the trial court, I helped found the Brockton Boys and Girls Club. And just my connection to Billy. I lived and breathed for the last 6 years everything that happened in Brockton through Bill. And I also know this, having been in the House of Representatives,
Okay.
having served in another member of another branch of state government, the trial court, I think I've got some experience that puts me in a position where if I have to go in and see the lieutenant governor, the governor, or the speaker of the House or the Senate president, I have relationships. I know how the system works.
That's good.
I have a relationship with the legislative delegation that nobody else has who's running.
Is that an advantage
mayor.
for you? Do you consider that an advantage or?
Tremendous advantage.
Okay.
Tremendous advantage. And I think anybody listening would understand that it would be an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage. So I understand the system. I also believe I know my own skills.
Okay.
And I think I know how to make them work on behalf of the people that live in the city. And I also want to be a doorman. I want to make sure that door is open for everybody. And I'm not afraid to unlock it, and I'm not afraid to open it and not close it, but just continually open it for people. And it's something I want to do. I want to create opportunities for people, as well as for the city of Brockton. And if I didn't think that I could do the job, I wouldn't be running.
Okay.
And I wouldn't run if Billy hadn't died in any event. I was more than happy, as was my wife Patty, with the direction the city was going in, the economic expansion, the additional boots on the ground, crime coming down, property values going up, streets being repaved. And one example, we used to laugh about West Elm Street
Okay.
in Brockton. And it would take you 2 days to go from Warren Avenue, let's say, up to West Junior High because of the potholes and the breaks in the street and so on and so forth. So we had a celebration, a private celebration, when that was finally done.
Okay.
But those state monies were released because Billy was relentless with state government to get those monies released so that that street could be repaved. And that was Billy. He was committed. Now, granted, He probably shouldn't have worked 19 hours a day, but he did. And did that contribute to his death on July 3rd?
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows? I just know that Billy loved the city so much that he gave his life for it.
So as we getting close to the end of this dialogue, if you have the opportunity right now to make your case for, in front of people Brockton who are listening and who are on the social media listening to this conversation, what would be your case you make for the election?
And I'll sum up this way.
Okay.
I was an Irish kid who was born and brought up in Brockton, the son of East Side parents, the grandson of immigrants, the grandson of shoe workers, who grew up in the city, attended Brockton Public Schools, represented the city in the House of Representatives proudly, who served in the Massachusetts trial court along with my father. My father served in the trial court as well. We were the only father-son combination to serve at that particular time. I don't know if another father-son has ever served together in the trial court. Who helped found the Boys and Girls Club, whose wife raises money to feed the poor, who practices law in Brockton every day, who's the oldest of the 5 sons of Jim and Jean Lawton, who now, after having run Billy's campaigns in 4 straight elections, wants the opportunity to finish the job started by Bill Carpenter. I'd be proud to finish the job. And I'm a Brockton kid. People have said, yeah, you lived in Brockton, slept in Bridgewater for the last several years. Yeah, I have. Been in Brockton every day.
Okay.
And I took advantage of when Billy died 8 days later on the day of his funeral services. I decided that I would run, and I'm running, and I would be more than proud to represent the city of Brockton and the people who reside there in City Hall. And it's an exciting time. It's a great opportunity, not just for me if I should get elected mayor, but I think for everybody who resides in the city.
Okay.
Thanks.
So thank you, Mark, and thank you for everyone who's listening. It was the second series, and we have with us Mark Lawton, who talked about his vision and his plan for the future of Brockton as he's running for mayor. Thank you and good evening. It was Ronald Bernard, the host for the series of Dialogue with the Candidate. Thank you.